Hello everyone, welcome to Bajirao IAS Academy's daily newspaper analysis. Today is 3rd February 2026 and today we have some very important topics for our understanding, for our analysis. Now one by one we'll be looking into all these important topics in detail. But before that, yesterday we have a prelims practice question. So this prelims practice question is based on union budget that was introduced in the parliament on 1st February 2026. Now in this context, article 112 of the constitution, it talks about annual financial statement. Constitution nowhere mentioned about the union budget, but the union budget is being called as annual financial statement by the constitution. Now this annual financial statement presented by the Union Finance Minister on behalf of President, not on behalf of President and not on behalf of the Prime Minister. So because of this reason, the statement is actually incorrect statement. And then second statement says that at the union level, no demand for grant can be made except on the recommendations of President of India. Of course, this statement is obviously true. So therefore, a demand for grant as part of the annual financial statement cannot be made except on the recommendations of the President of India. So this statement is correct statement and first statement is incorrect. Obviously, the correct answer is B2 only. Now today also we have one prelims practice question. So that is based on a news article which talks about the devolution for the southern states as recommended by the 16th Finance Commission. So based on the 16th Finance Commission, you have got a question. So question is, consider the following factors that may influence the horizontal devolution provided by the 16th Finance Commission. So what are the factors it will take into consideration when it has been making devolutions? Population, income distance, demographic performance, forest and ecology, and the tax performance. Right. So choose the correct answer and just present the correct answer in the comment section, and we'll be discussing this in tomorrow's class, and I will also be giving the correct answer in tomorrow's class. So let's understand a list of topics for today. The first topic is about US tariff on India reduced to 18%. Now understand that US has imposed tariffs on Indian goods. The total tariffs ranges to 50% of tariff. So tariff is a tax which has been imposed by US on Indian goods which are exported to US markets. The 50% tariffs on Indian goods would make Indian goods less competitive in the US market. So that is the main problem. So because of less competitiveness, the less competitiveness is because the prices of Indian goods in the US markets would significantly increases. So because of this particular reason, India's total exports to US will significantly decrease. However, what has been happening in recent times, these tariffs are being reduced from 50% to just 18%, and within this 50% of tariffs, so the first type is 25% tariff. This 25% tariff is known as reciprocal tariff, and the second type is another 25%. This tariff is a penalty for purchasing Russian oil. A penalty for Russian oil. We all knew that if you look at India's energy import basket, so Russia has become the top country in terms of energy exports to India, right? So therefore, US believes that India purchasing Russian oil may be fueling Ukraine war. So because of this reason, 25% tariffs are imposed on Indian goods for purchasing Russian oil, and 25% tariffs are on reciprocal tariffs. So reciprocal tariffs are those tariffs which are imposed because India has also imposed some tariffs on US goods. Right. So recently, US President Donald Trump has announced that the tariffs are being reduced from 50% to 18%. And in fact, Prime Minister Narendra Modi and US President Donald Trump have also agreed for a trade deal as well. Now understand that recently India signed free trade agreements with a number of countries, and this is going to benefit India, and this trade deal with US would potentially benefit India and US as well. Understand, with US we have a trade surplus, therefore a trade deal like this with US would be very, very important. Now in this context, so one thing that we should understand that recently there are high level of tariffs, and apart from that, trade tensions between India and US, particularly after the Operation Sindoor. But after the trade tensions, it is certainly a good news that US reducing tariffs from 50% to just 18%. This is certainly good news, and this can be seen as a positive turn in the bilateral economic relations after the tensions between India and US, right? So if you look at this, on April 2nd, 2025, so on this date, US has imposed 26% reciprocal tariff on Indian imports under the Global Liberation Day tariff actions. So followed by that action, on April 10, Trump pauses the reciprocal tariff for 90 days but maintains 10% duty on all imports. On July 31st, 2025, Trump announced 25% tariffs on all Indian goods. And this 25% tariffs are potential penalty for purchasing Russian oil, as I have already explained. And on August 7, 2025, US boosts tariffs on Indian goods to 50%, citing India's continued purchase of Russian oil. Right. Now in this context, so if we talk about this, US government completely removed sanctions imposed on India for purchasing Russian oil. Earlier it was 25%, and this 25% becomes 0% now. And 25% tariffs are reciprocal tariffs, and the reciprocal tariffs became 18% from 25%. Right. So therefore this is very important, very significant, and in fact, because of this 18% tariff on Indian goods and a potential trade deal between US and India, so Indian purchases of US energy, technology, agriculture and other products are going to be benefited, and most of these sectors are labor intensive sectors. Understand that labor intensive sectors have a huge potential to create large scale employment opportunity. So therefore this is going to benefit Indian economy, and by this, so more than $500 billion of trade is a possibility because of this trade deal and reducing the tariffs on Indian goods by US. So I hope you have understood this. Now let's understand the other elements that US President Donald Trump has highlighted in this context. So if we talk about the other things he actually highlighted, so Trump has also confirmed that Indian side assured him that India will not be buying Russian oil. But on the other hand, there is no confirmation from Indian side whether India will go ahead purchasing Russian oil or not. But ultimately, energy security is very important. Energy security is very important for a country like India. Now, apart from that, if we talk about energy security, Russia is also one of the long-standing, reliable strategic partner for us. So therefore, there is no such guarantee that India would immediately stop purchasing Russian oil. But US President Donald Trump has announced that India has agreed to stop buying Russian oil. And Donald Trump has also announced that India would start purchasing more oil from US, or purchase of more US products, including the energy and other goods as well. And in fact, he also reported figures may rise up to 500 billion US dollars. Now, if you look at the trade between India and US currently, the trade is around 120 billion US dollars. So, but the potential is more than 500 billion US dollars. If there is a bilateral trade between India and US, so that is going to benefit both India and US, and that could actually take this trade from 120 billion US dollars to near about 500 billion US dollars, right? So in fact, if we talk about the context and background of it, this announcement actually comes after a period of strained trade relations. There were trade tensions between India and US. US President Donald Trump has also made several allegations on India, right? So but this is a positive step and a welcome step, particularly from US reducing tariffs to just 18%, and this is going to benefit the labor intensive exports, and the labor intensive sectors are going to be benefited from this, and they are going to create a large scale gainful employment opportunities for India's youth, particularly for women as well. Now, because of the reduced tariffs, it has affected the stock market, and stock market rally has got started after this India-US bilateral trade, and in fact a large scale FIIs also comes into the Indian stock market as well, right? I hope you have understood this. And in fact, if we talk about India-US trade deal between these two countries, India will lower its tariffs on US exports to 0, and US will drop reciprocal tariffs from 25% to just 18%, and US will completely waive off this 25% tariffs on Indian goods as a penalty for importing Russian oil. And in fact, so India will step up oil purchase from US, and Trump has also claimed that India assured him that it will stop purchasing Russian oil and it will start purchasing oil from US. And in fact, he also claimed that India may potentially purchase oil from Venezuela as well, because we knew that Venezuela is a country with the largest oil reserves in the world. And in fact, so Trump has also said that India has committed buying a 500 billion on several American things, including energy, agriculture, coal, and technology, all these things, right? So he also claimed that this deal potentially helps stop Ukraine war. So these are some important details with respect to this. And there was another important editorial on the wetlands, protection and conservation of wetlands, right? So recently World Wetland Day has been celebrated on 2nd February. 2nd February is celebrated as World Wetland Day because this was the date on which the Ramsar Convention was signed in Iran. So Ramsar is a city in Iran. So on this day, the Ramsar Convention was adopted in the year 1971. Because of this reason, 2nd February is celebrated as World Wetland Day. Now, in fact, within South Asian region, India is a country which has the most number of wetlands. Currently, India has 28 wetlands, so which are designated as Ramsar sites. Now, in this context, we'll be understanding what is this Ramsar Convention and how it is going to protect the wetlands all across the world, and what is the importance of wetlands in general, and how wetlands are very important for India. So we'll be understanding all these things in detail, right? So first of all, so we need to know briefly about this Ramsar Convention. So Ramsar Convention is a convention for the protection of wetlands. To protect wetlands, Ramsar Convention was adopted in the year 1971, and this Ramsar Convention is also an intergovernmental treaty. So this is actually a treaty between all the governments, and it was adopted in a city called Ramsar in Iran, and it finally entered into force in the year 1975. Now, in fact, those wetlands of international importance, they are actually declared as Ramsar sites. So in India, there are 98 Ramsar sites so far, because recently some Ramsar sites from UP and Gujarat became part of India's list of Ramsar sites. Now, in fact, the world's largest Ramsar site is Pantanal, which is located in South America, right? Now, within Ramsar Convention, there is another list called as Montreux Record. Now this Montreux record was adopted at a place called Montreux, Switzerland in the year 1990. Now this Montreux record identifies those Ramsar sites that need immediate and urgent priority based conservation. Now in India there are two sites which are part of this Montreux record. So one is a Loktak Lake in Manipur, and the other one is Kailadiyo, which is located in Rajasthan. So these two sites are actually part of the Montreux record. Earlier Chilka Lake was also part of the Montreux record, but it was removed from the list of Montreux record because a significant improvements with respect to conservation and protection of the Chilka Lake. Right. So we knew that on 2nd February World Wetland Day is celebrated because this was the date on which Ramsar Convention was adopted. But the key question here is, what exactly is a wetland? So that is the key question here. So if we talk about what exactly is a wetland, so wetland is actually a place which the land is covered by water. It could be salt water, fresh water, brackish water, and somewhere between, either seasonally or permanently. Right. Now in fact it could take many forms, including rivers. So rivers can be wetlands, marshes can also be wetlands, and bogs, mangroves, and mud flats, ponds, swamps, so everything. So therefore wetlands can actually take different forms. So this is any place which is actually covered with the water either seasonally or permanently, so that is known as a wetland. Now let's understand the importance of wetlands and what are the issues that these wetlands have been facing and what needs to be done to conserve these wetlands. Now this year on 2nd February World Wetland Day is celebrated. The theme of wetlands this year is Wetlands and Traditional Knowledge, Celebrating Cultural Heritage. So this is the theme of this year's World Wetland Day. Now in fact this particularly highlighting that India's deep-rooted relationship between the communities and wetlands. Now community participation in the conservation and protection of wetlands is very important. Community participation, right? So therefore this particular theme of 2026 World Wetland Day is emphasizing on community participation along with celebrating the cultural heritage. Now in fact in Tamil Nadu there's a irrigation system called a tank system, right? So this tank system is also known as coulombs. Tank system in Tamil Nadu is also called as coulombs, and in Wayanad, Canis. So from to traditional fishing wetlands in Andhra Pradesh. So these wetlands have long been both ecology and economy. So therefore they are sustaining the ecology as well as they are providing the economic opportunities for the local communities. So therefore it is very important for the local communities to protect and conserve these wetlands, and because of that reason a community participation one defining characteristic of the wetland conservation. So however, so despite there are legal frameworks, particularly we have the Ramsar Convention. So despite there is a Ramsar Convention and the legal safeguards which are being extended to these wetlands, nearly 40% of India's wetlands already have disappeared in last 3 decades. So almost 40% of the wetlands are disappeared. So therefore despite their significant contribution to the ecology and environment and the economic opportunities these wetlands are providing to the people, that in last 3 decades most of the wetlands are actually disappeared. So therefore wetlands are vulnerable and they are increasingly facing threats. So these threats have to be identified and there should be a concerted action. The action should focus on protection and conservation of these wetlands. Now understand, the core problem when it comes to protection of wetlands is not the absence of policy. So there is a policy framework which is in place, but the problem is weak implementation, weak enforcement of the policy. And there is a fragmentation and capacity gaps. So these are the main problems which have been resulted in the degradation or increasing vulnerability of wetlands, and that has to change, right? Now, before understanding why India's wetlands are in trouble, so let's first understand how wetlands contribute significantly for economy, for environment. Now, in fact, wetlands are actually the places which store a huge amount of the carbon dioxide. So we all knew that the carbon dioxide is contributing for the global warming, and global warming will further leads to the climate change. So therefore, wetlands are a very important source to store the global carbon emissions. Thereby, they help prevent or reduce the global warming. Secondly, wetlands are source of a clean drinking water as well, so potable drinking water as well. So wetlands provides economic opportunities for local people. So if we talk about the economic opportunities that these wetlands are providing, that the fishing is a source of livelihood, irrigation for agriculture, tourism is also a source, right? So therefore, these are the economic opportunities that wetlands are actually providing to the people, right? And apart from that, for economies, so to achieve the sustainable development goals as well, the wetlands are very, very important, right? So in this context, we have understood the importance of wetlands. And what problems India's wetlands have been facing in this context. Let's try and understand this aspect. So firstly, there's no legal vacuum because the policy is already in place. The policy is already in place, but there is an implementation deficit, right? So India has multiple instruments. These legal instruments aimed at protecting wetlands, for example, Wetlands Conservation and Management Rules 2017 were framed, and then National Plan for the Conservation of Aquatic Ecosystem. This is also existing. Coastal regulation zones are framed, aimed to protect the coastal areas, and the Ramsar Convention also. India signed and ratified this convention, and so far India has 98 Ramsar sites. So there is no doubt that we have a legal protection. So despite the legal measures, the wetlands have been degrading or declining. Now this is evident from the fact that 40% of the wetlands declined in the last 3 decades. So therefore, this is actually a sign of declining wetlands or degradation of wetlands. The problem is implementation and weak enforcement and fragmentation of the existing legal framework. So therefore, this is the area that the governments need to work on, right? And apart from that, another major problem is encroachment of the wetlands. Now, encroachment of the wetlands primarily to carry out aquaculture activity. So this could be the reason. And in fact, so wetlands are also sit at the land water development interface, right? So since they are located in the land and water interface, I mean that they are between the land, this is water and the land, so they are located between the land and water, so they are like an interface, and because of that reason they are the primary targets for infrastructure development, real estate, roads construction, right? So therefore, these are the primary factors which the encroachment of the wetlands, it could lead to the degradation and increasing vulnerability or increasing loss of the wetlands. And then we need to talk about the pollution overload. Now in fact, most of these wetlands are being polluted because the industrial emissions are being released, and then the household municipal waste is also being released, agricultural runoff is also released into the wetlands. So all these factors have been increasing the minerals in the wetlands, and increasing nutrients in these wetlands, they are creating increasing microbial activity, and that leads to the eutrophication of the wetlands, right? So eutrophication is actually a situation where these wetlands are almost called as dead lakes. So why? Because when wetlands have increased nutrients, the increased nutrients will increase the microbial activity. It will consume oxygen which is available, and when the microbial activity is consuming too much of oxygen, then there will be a less oxygen for other species which are living in a wetland, and that create conditions called hypoxic zones. So this might create condition called hypoxic zones, and this hypoxic zones, what it causes, it reduces the fish reproduction, and bottom dwellers in those wetlands would die, and the colonial organisms would also die out because of the eutrophication. Now, what are the sources of eutrophication? The wastewater effluents, household municipal wastewater effluents, untreated sewage will also be released, agricultural runoff, animal feed and waste disposal, sewer overflow. So these are actually the point sources. And if we talk about the non-point sources, agricultural runoff, urban runoff, septic tank leakages, atmospheric deposition, pasture and range runoff, and abandoned mine runoff. So all these factors have been increasing the nutrients in the wetlands. So that causes eutrophication, and eutrophication further creates hypoxic zones. Right. Now, the other major problem that Indian wetlands have been facing is coastal squeeze or climate change. For example, the mangroves and lagoons are also facing the double bind. For example, the landward development pressure that the wetlands have been facing, and on the other hand, the seaward sea level rise and cyclones. So therefore, a double burden or double pressure that these wetlands have been facing, both from the land side and as well as the sea side as well. And in fact, they lack space to migrate naturally. So this is another major problem that wetlands have been facing. However, in this context, what must be done? So therefore, we have a regulation, we have a legal architecture. So the focus should be on the implementation, and then the interdepartmental, interministerial coordination. So this is also very important for the protection and conservation of the wetlands. Community participation is also a very important aspect, because with right community participation, we could actually protect and conserve wetlands. And apart from that, promotion of tourism, and this tourism must be ecotourism and sustainable tourism in those areas. And then there is a need to regulate aquaculture. There's a need to regulate the aquaculture, because aquaculture activities are destroying or degrading these wetlands. And apart from that, a need to regulate infrastructure development, whether it is any other infrastructure, hotels, resorts, so commercial buildings, need to regulate the infrastructure development and prevent encroachment of the wetlands. So wetlands encroachment must be prevented. So this is also very, very important. And apart from that, so adopt best practices which could help protect these wetlands. And 10 is capacity building and community training. Capacity building and community training is also very, very important for the protection and conservation of wetlands. So these steps can be adopted largely. so for the protection and conservation of wetlands, right? So in fact, there's no doubt that we can equate these wetlands as the living systems. The wetlands are known as living systems, and wetlands are very important for water security, right? So they ensure water security, they provide livelihood security, they ensure disaster resilience, and even they are also the sources of cultural heritage in any country. So in order to save these wetlands, so science must guide the policy must empower the people, and the traditional knowledge must be treated as evidence, not nostalgia, right? So therefore, in this context, there is a need to align modern tools with the ancient or ancestral wisdom, and that will help protect the wetlands as a thriving and working ecosystems, and that is essential and important for countries' resilience, right? So in this context, if we look at the benefits of wetlands, so wetlands, they help revive biodiversity of that particular area, and they help replenish and filter water supply. They provide drinking water, irrigation water, and they are a very important source of to store carbon, and they also act as a sponges to reduce the flood impact. They improve the livelihoods, they protect or they provide livelihood security for the people who are living near these wetlands. They are source of ecotourism, and they enhance the overall well-being, and they also help achieve the agenda 2030 sustainable development goals 2030 can be achieved